Welcome to the Scaling Japan podcast, a podcast about how to grow your business from $100,000 and beyond in the land of the rising sun.
Welcome to the Scaling Japan podcast. I'm your host, Tyson Batino, and on today's episode, I'm interviewing Eli David Rokah, the CEO of StartupBlink. StartupBlink is a startup ecosystem research center working with over 100 government entities, corporate innovation programs, and multilateral organizations worldwide. StartupBlink's global startup ecosystem map has hundreds of thousands of registered startups, co-working spaces, and accelerators, creating a robust sample of innovation globally. And StartupBlink is well known for creating the Startup Ecosystem Index of 1,000 cities. That's right, 1,000 cities and 100 countries. And today we're talking about where Japan is on the index. Before we start, here's a quick introduction to myself, your host. I'm the CEO of LaunchLab. We support setting up a company and back office in Japan. We also provide affordable advisory on raising capital, IPO, and other finance topics. I also run Scaling Your Company that provides courses and sales advisory and digital marketing agency services for the Japan market. If you need help, feel free to reach out. Very glad to have you on, Eli, and could you please introduce yourself?
Hey, Tyson, really nice to be here. Thanks so much. I'm Eli, I'm the CEO of StartupBlink, and really excited to dive into the Japanese ecosystem. I've always been a fan of Japan, and it would be interesting to discuss a little bit of insights that are more data-driven and less subjective. Definitely, as a side note, I was supposed to be in Japan in March 2020. I was invited by the city of Kyoto, but we all know what happened in March 2020, so rain check a little bit, and looking forward to also arrive one day.
Yeah, so I think maybe IBS 2025. I think it's actually the second biggest startup event of Japan is IBS in Kyoto. It started today, ends in 2 days, but next year. So one of your staff team members, Asengo, she reached out to me, and I thought the topic was perfect because the end of last year, we spoke to Joshua Flannery from Innovation Dojo, who's based in Kansai, and he gave a really solid account of like what's going on in the universities, the innovation, accelerators, incubators, and just gave it a real nice ground level view of like what's happening, like what's the action that's happening. But I think and also we've had a lot of the cities come on telling us what their goals are, what industries they want to attract to their city, what benefits they offer, but we've never approached it from let's say, an Asia point of view, global point of view, how Japan actually compares to other cities, other countries, and how the cities compare with other countries. So I thought it was really, really nice to have you on to really give like, a 40,000-foot view because we're just deep in the weeds. And so, yeah, I think it's good to have both perspectives. So could give us a brief overview of StartupBlink and maybe also to the StartupBlink index.
So basically, the StartupBlink index is using this massive map that we have of hundreds of thousands of entities and basically runs a lot of algorithms on top of them to analyze and to rank the ecosystems of those 1,241 cities and 120 countries. Those parameters, they are divided to 35 different parameters. They're in 3 baskets. There is the basket of the quantity, which is how many. Over here, we're going to ask how many startups, how many co-working, how many accelerators, how many meetups, communities, investors, and so on. There's also a basket of quality, which is how good the ecosystem is. So over here, we will have total amount of investment per city or country, the amount of unicorns, the amount of R&D centers of big companies and corporates and so on, and the total amount of employees. So there are many, many elements here that are all running into one algorithm. And then there is also the business score, which is basically the business environment. Over here, by the way, Japan is doing a little bit better. So it's ranked 21 in the world in its general ranking for the countries. I should say that the country's ranking takes into account per capita. So it takes into account the size of the population, and the city's rankings does not. So that's why we have Japan at 21 and Tokyo would be at 14. That's a little bit of disparity between them. So yeah, over here it's basically the business, the doing business index, the amount of patents that the country has, the number of universities. So you can say it's basically the infrastructure of the ecosystem in general, the level of English and many other elements. So all of those 40 parameters together are creating the rankings for all those locations.
Gotcha. You asked me a question about what is the number one. Could you ask that question again?
What is the number one?
I think you say company, I think, or the only Japanese company that was able to rank.
Yeah. In Japan itself, we have many, many thousands of entities that are contributing to the rankings, but we do have something that we call a Pantheon Club. So the Pantheon Club is comprised out of companies that everyone would know that are very, very relevant to the ecosystem, but everyone around the world would know. So in Japan, for example, the company that we do have in the Pantheon Club is SoftBank. And I think it connects a little bit to the topic of today of how SoftBank is really an inspiring company and very non-Asian, because one of the problem of Asian ecosystems, and we work with quite a lot of them, is that there is a lot of risk aversion and a lot of reputation aversion as well. So SoftBank are very, very interesting. They just blazed into the global VC ecosystem, like did it in a very, very aggressive and robust way. And also, Masa-san took a lot of risks, including reputational risks that are quite big. And I think this is exactly what is needed. If you ask me, he is probably the biggest gift for the Japanese ecosystem in the last 20 years. Regardless if you like his style or not, or the style of SoftBank, this is what we need. We need people that are taking risks, that are extravagant, that are basically taking us a little bit out of our shell, and take risks in the style of American mindset and Israeli mindset, and less in the style of, let's say, Japanese mindset in a way. So SoftBank is a very inspiring example for me about where Japan should go. What is the mindset? Because at the end of the day, the business of startup ecosystem development, a lot of it, when people are asking, look, why are some ecosystems successful and some are not? You see that the amount of control that the government has is relatively limited. Regardless if it's the best government in the world, like you want to make sure that you're not making mistakes and making entrepreneurs' life difficult. That's 100%. But once you're relatively out of the way and let everyone play, the strength of the ecosystem is mostly determined by the quality of the entrepreneur. And because I really do believe that the general intelligence of a global level is the same, we're talking about mindset more than anything. And the idea about mindset, one can ask, look, why are USA startups or Israeli startups are so successful? The mindset is very, very important in terms of taking risks, a little bit of fake it until you make it. And the idea that, hey, I'm going to build the best company in the world. I don't care that I'm now in the basement and I haven't really found a co-founder or investor, but I just know I'm going to win. And this is something that in Asia, it's a little bit hard to do because the reputation is very, very important. You probably don't want to put your name on the line. And I think putting your name on the line is so important in the best startup ecosystems. That has been the thing that influenced it the most and their success of basically creating a situation that if you totally fail, you declare bankruptcy in a way and move on and build your next startup. And that's something that I think the SoftBank really embodies this element of we're taking big risks, we're not playing safe. And I just think it's beautiful and should be celebrated. Once again, regardless of what you think of the person, of the company and their style, this is usually what works in this world. So
yeah, several of the former guests are former SoftBank. So I'll give a shout out to Fuminori Gunji, who was a salesman at SoftBank Robotics, John Kirsch, who was the first SoftBank salesperson in America hired by Son directly,
wow.
probably 35 years ago. And we also had someone from SoftBank is putting a lot of investment in DeepCore, their VC arm. And they also created Station AI in collaboration with Aichi. So Station, it actually doesn't stand for artificial intelligence. Station AI stands for Aichi. So Aichi Prefecture
Okay.
with Nagoya.
Yeah.
And we had one person from SoftBank they're deeply involved in that project with Aichi.
That's really cool. And I think once again, the idea is that the last wave of Japanese innovation happens in the last century with Sony and Toshiba and all those companies. And ever since then, we didn't really have something on a global scale. So that's the beauty of SoftBank. That's why it should be celebrated, because there is at least something, a piece of the Japanese ecosystem that now went global, is known global. And in order to really get to the top in terms of countries and cities, we need a wave of soft banks, and hopefully not only venture capital companies, but more importantly, those startups that everyone is going to be using. That's sort of like the hope for the future. So it seems like you're in a very good position to actually create those companies in the next decade. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would actually say a lot of the early Japanese startups, like let's say Cyber Agent, Recruit, Cybozu, but anyhow, like comes they have thousands of employees. But if I had to think about like what has been their contribution to the startup ecosystem or DNA, maybe they did a little bit of CVC, a little bit of venture capital, but not. I'll say they took care of themselves. We'll say the
Mhm.
founders are doing very well, but relatively to like what they could have contributed to the startup ecosystem is a bit questionable. So yeah, I
Yeah,
so it's
look,
so I think for SoftBank, I like your point that you can say what you can say about Son. Some people might say he's a bit reckless, a bit of a cowboy, but when he says that he wants to start up the startup ecosystem, you can't say that he's not a liar.
100%. And I think that everyone should think about themselves. Nobody has the responsibility to think about others or on the ecosystem. If you're successful, then the ecosystem is going to be successful. The thing about SoftBank is that they think big. By thinking big, you're creating a lot of impact. So it's not about necessarily contributing and thinking about the ecosystem, just saying, look, we are not interested only in the local market. Because at the end of the day, you can even tell yourself that someone that focuses on the local market, on the Japanese, let's say, market, is basically going to take someone else's lunch from Japan because you're creating a revolution. Yeah, but the revolution is only local. The beauty in those companies that are actually managing to go global is that just like in Israel, in Israel, when people are innovating, they don't think at all about the Israeli market. It's too small. So in a way, whoever is on the local market keeps their lunch, but those companies are bringing so much money in from the global market, from the USA, from Europe, from Japan, and so on and so on. So it seems like that in Japan, there
Ah,
is sort of
interesting.
a barrier that kind of like tells people, because I want to play it safe and I want to stay in geographies that I understand, probably Japan and maybe a little bit of Asia, I'm not going to go full scale global and compete with, let's say, the Americans. Now, if you do that, and that's what SoftBank did on a very interesting vertical of venture capital, then you become a giant and create this real impact on the ecosystem. And it seems like that from the story, what you mentioned is that those founders or those companies, at least I don't know anything about them because again, we rank 120 countries and more than 1,200 cities. But from what you told me, it seems like there was something there that the founders did not go all in all the way into the global dominance. I want to be the best in the world, but they sort of like limited themselves on a relatively smaller box. When you do, your impact is small to begin with, regardless of your intentions and so on. So yeah.
My personal thought is one thing that could benefit the Japanese startup ecosystem is the successful founders
Mhm.
creating multiple companies. But
Mm.
what tends to happen is they create one successful company, then they just either, they kind of retire, be like a VC, or they just become a board member. But a lot of times you don't see them develop. What I mean to say is if you're a really very good entrepreneur, you create multiple companies, you'll have all these people who got to learn directly from you.
Yeah,
And those
I actually think,
people will
yeah.
go on to create more companies. And I kind of think like rather than being like a VC, I think if they were to create more companies and just they develop the next generation through, the second or third companies they create. And so I don't, this is more of a personal thought too, because I was
No, no,
thinking
no, this is interesting.
like
This
I
is
was
really
thinking,
interesting.
my thought was because I was wondering, like, in my case, I probably will create another startup or I will create another startup. But for me, it just seemed like natural. Like, I
Mhm.
just have to create another startup. So I couldn't understand why a lot of these founders who have exited, I feel like they're going to more like cushy roles and they're not putting
Yeah.
themselves out there again. I was like, what's going on? Like, Were they just
No,
lucky? Were they just lucky the first time?
no, that's exactly what they should do, and they do it all over the world. The problem is that they exit too small. They exit from a company that usually has an impact only on the Japanese ecosystem. But
And this
basically,
is
the idea of us,
foreigners and Japanese in Japan, I
yeah,
think.
yeah, yeah,
So
100%, 100%.
I'll
But
definitely get some heat for this because no one
no,
has
it's
ever,
cool.
I don't think anyone has challenged it publicly, but
Look, the idea of a serial entrepreneur is basically an entrepreneur that builds a company, sees that it doesn't work according to the potential of what they want, and they build the next company and the next company until they strike gold. For example, there would be zero reason for someone that, let's say for Steve Jobs or for Bezos or the founders of Google, they also quit. Once you hit the goal, you keep on moving on the goal instead of, there is no value in leaving becoming the CEO of Google or the founder of Google and then leaving. There is enough innovation there. So serial entrepreneurship is basically trying time and time and time again until you hit the big one. When you hit the big one, that's it, you stop. There is only one Elon Musk in the world that actually has Tesla and Neuralink and whatever. You won't see a lot of people like this, almost zero. So the idea is to keep on grinding until you're managing to find the one that works, and yes, then exit at some point and become a VC. That's absolutely great. The tragedy of many ecosystems is that when people they basically exit, they don't even stay within the ecosystem. They would go to the US, they would retire, and so on. So, as far as I'm concerned, as a founder that has been massively successful and created many, many jobs and leaves, if they become a VC, that's the best case scenario because entrepreneurship is extremely taxing. So if you already found something that works and you put 10 or 15 years about on it, there is zero reason to do something else. You've done your part. Your entrepreneurship part is over. You can also see it in Israel and the US and the UK. Nobody is becoming an entrepreneur after they're successful. You hit your success, you go 100 kilometers an hour or even 200 kilometers an hour, yeah, and you basically harvest all this success. And then when you're tired, you retire, you're not supposed to start another company. But of course, there is a scenario when you do something, it's not extremely successful, you do a small exit, and then you let go. And that's a little bit sad. But generally, the idea of serial entrepreneur is try, try, try until you hit it big. When you hit it big, then if you're really good to the ecosystem, you become a VC and you start investing. So that's the right evolution. But something in Japan apparently is not happening on a global scale. So this is the missing part, the ambition and the ability to go full in or all in a way. So yeah.
My thought was going to be like, I think Japan maybe has enough VCs, but we don't have enough founders. So I think my point is more rather than exiting and becoming a VC, I think a lot of these other founders actually could benefit the community more if you would develop the next generation through building a company. Because I think as a VC, you just don't have enough touch points with a person to really have the impact
I
as opposed to, let's say, these
I
people
agree.
joining you as an early, let's say, team member, let's say, those who survive, I'll say, those who survive, through like stage A or who make it from the pre-seed. And, these people you can take up to like seed, pre-series A, series A, and then they leave and make their own companies. Like these are the people and I feel like would like to see more of that in Japan. So I'm not criticizing those who have kind of exited and just, let's say, just done VC. My perspective is more, I think it would probably help more if you would develop the next generation more intimately.
Yeah, you need more founders, 100%. By the way, what you mentioned, once again, I have never been in Japan, so I can only give you basically you mentioned something and I say, oh, okay, I saw this happening in other countries. Usually when someone tells me that they have more VCs than founders or more accelerators than founders, it might reflect on an underlying problem that actually the government is too involved. Because basically, if an ecosystem has incentives to actually have more support organization or more startup ecosystem stakeholders, and there is scarcity on startups, then the incentives are misaligned. Someone is getting it wrong, or someone is thinking that they're going to create activity and success via artificial means. So again, I haven't been there, but this line, when I hear about it, then this is a point to maybe have a look on in a way. So, but yeah, it's a very interesting topic. Yeah.
And one caveat, so there are, I think maybe there are a lot of startups, but what I mean to say is in terms of quality, like when I meet the startup, like, oh, I want to invest in this founder, Like, I would say, yeah, I mean, I do get sometimes, but not, or I like to
Yeah,
see it more.
you have a quality problem, and that usually is because people ambitions are not aligned. So you have the top quality people would usually go to a corporate job or something that has less of a reputational risk, and that's definitely happening a lot in countries where there is risk aversion at some capacity. So that's probably the reason of why you don't really meet the high quality people, because maybe they're in government or they're in the corporate in a way, instead of starting their own startup. In other ecosystem, if you're high quality, you have only one option. You start a startup. You don't even think about other elements. So,
Like,
yeah.
I had a good conversation with one of my friends, but he was talking about like so like trading companies, like the major trading companies, Mitsui, Mitsubishi, where they sell things abroad. And like, if you wanted to sell cars in your Japanese company, you want to open a restaurant in the US, or you want to sell cars in the US, you want to sell Japanese food in the US, there are these badasses, like Japanese badasses, who have conquered other markets, but they all are in the trading companies. They're making tons of money. And so, like, where we're talking about the startup ecosystem, like what Japanese startups are abroad, and it's like you have to struggle to think
Not
about
really.
it.
None. Yeah. No,
But these
no.
trading companies, like, they dominate countries, Marubeni,
I
like,
know.
and so there's a possibility, like, all that talent. So a lot of it is still concentrated, and they have making very, very lucrative salaries, like, 300K a year maybe or something.
No, this
Uh,
is 100% the risk aversion. So basically, startup founders, what is a startup? It's something that has a big ingredient of uncertainty about it, usually even about demand. You don't even know if people are going to buy what you want. So all those entrepreneurs that are going into the car and trading and whatever, they want to avoid this very painful phase of finding product market fit, which is basically, look, I'm offering something innovative that nobody else ever offered, and let's see if they want it or not. When you sell a car, you don't have this uncertainty. You know that people want to buy cars in a way. So I guess that what is missing is this element of, hey, let me try something totally crazy that nobody else has tried before. And the question is, what happens if I fail? In Israel, if you're failing, then people say, good job, okay, that was really good effort. Let's try again. And I have a feeling that in some countries, I don't know about Japan, when you're failing, it's kind of like, oh, did you hear that John failed? Oh, wow, yeah, and he didn't really pay people, and some people he owes money to, and whatever. When you have this, that's a big problem. If there is fear from this failure, because you have 90% of failure. So if we're in a situation that someone tells you, Tyson, you're going to do something and 90% you're going to fail and disappoint some people. If there is the inability, the psychological inability of the psychic, of the national psychic, to actually accept this and say, I'm going for it anyway, you won't have entrepreneurs. And then everyone would focus on doing the things that are validated in a way. So, yeah.
Hello, listeners. I'm excited to announce my live cohort course to help you increase your sales in Japan. Many foreigners struggle to turn first meetings into second meetings because they lack a sales pamphlet that follows the standard format in Japan. Even if you have a good first meeting, your internal contact will hand over your current sales pamphlet to the decision maker, and they'll take one look and say, they don't get Japan. My live 4-session cohort course will teach you how to make a sales pamphlet in English using the standard format in Japan. You will receive a sales pamphlet template, more than 10 examples from Japanese companies, and a lot of feedback, so you can end the course with a sales pamphlet that gets more meetings and therefore more sales. Getting one extra deal will more than pay off the course, so joining is a no-brainer. You can find more details of the course at scalingyourcompany.com/sales pamphlet. And we'll have a link in the show notes. So I want to dive into Japan's performance in 2024. So I guess, would you like to go maybe city first or country first? I'll let you choose.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, let's go cities first. So, first of all, what we have over here on the cities themselves is that we have Tokyo at number 14 in the world, stable, with no momentum change. Your ecosystem is very, very centralized. If you look at Tokyo's total score, it's about 49.4 of the algorithm that I told you about. And the second ranked city is Osaka, which is 4.6. It means that we have about 11 times more ecosystem strength in Tokyo than in Osaka, and then in Kyoto that follows. And that's not necessarily bad. That's a sign that you do have a clear winner, a clear king in the ecosystem. By the way, this is something that we see in Asia a lot. You have a lot of European countries, for example, Spain, where you would have both Madrid and Barcelona neck to neck, or Sydney and Melbourne, and so on, very, very close together. The Japanese ecosystem is very centralized. It's centralized in Tokyo. So again, we're talking about 14, being 14 globally. We're a little bit far from a few of the leading ones. For example, as I mentioned before, 49. The score of Tokyo is 49. If you would go to number 5, for example, it would be 110. But then again, the ecosystem is doing well. It's stable. It's not necessarily a global leader, a top 10 ecosystem, but it's getting there. It's not far away from there. Paris, with a top 10 ecosystem, is at 60.7. So we're not that far. We're about 25% less than top 10. We can definitely have a look at top 10 and not being scared of getting there. What we need is exactly what you mentioned, Tyson, more startups that everyone knows. I'm also struggling. If you tell me, look, who do you know in Japan? I would tell you SoftBank. And then I would tell you Sony and Toshiba, but they're from the older generation. We need more fresh blood that is basically disrupting the world. Once we have it, with all the great infrastructure that you have, we're going to really be able to go for the leading position. So that's definitely lacking. So on the first tier is Tokyo. Then we have on the second tier both Osaka and Kyoto. Osaka is ranked 143 in the world. Kyoto is 169. They're relatively together in the ranking. And then later we have an additional tier, sort of unique for Fukuoka and Nagoya, both of them together. And then we have a few ecosystems that are really in the seed stage that would be, and I hope I'm not butchering the pronunciation, Sendai, Sapporo, Okayama, Hiroshima, Tsukuba. So those are basically the ones. I'm sorry, they actually are 14 ecosystems. So we have also Fukushima, Naha, Kagoshima, and Oita. So basically you have 14 ecosystems. I would say that for the numbers of your population, I would have expected to see more cities for such a big country. So it means that we have a little bit of a centralized ecosystem, and at the same time, in a way, there aren't enough seeds of innovation in smaller cities other than the ones that I mentioned. But considering that you're in Asia, and Asia generally is extremely centralized to begin with, it's actually not bad at all. So that's currently the situation. On the country level, more difficult because we're now ranking, of course, per capita. So when we look at per capita, Japan is currently number 21 in the world. And you're just together, very close together to South Korea, Taiwan, United Arab Emirates, Belgium, Norway, and so on. Those are, you ranked even better than most of them. So that's basically the environment, but they're relatively far from the big winners, which are basically United States, United Kingdom, Israel, Canada, and Singapore. And if we're talking about a country that has managed to create a lot of high quality impact in the Asian ecosystem that has an amazing momentum, then Singapore without a doubt comes to mind. And I think that it's interesting to maybe talk about what is the difference between Japan and Singapore is basically Singapore manages, although it is struggling with exactly the same problem with its own local entrepreneurs, it manages to attract entrepreneurs from the entire region. So everyone who is incorporating a company in Asia is going to Singapore. In a way, they created such a great business environment that they're just pulling tons of entrepreneurs from the outside. And I will say I've seen some very, very smart municipalities in Japan that have realized that and are doing a lot. One of them that comes to mind is Fukuoka, which is doing a ton of startup promotion with startup visas and so on. They really understood that one of the fountains of success is going to be the foreign entrepreneurs arriving. So that's sort of like a little bit the difference, let's say, between Singapore and Japan and where we're currently positioned.
And for the listeners, we've interviewed Fukuoka, Nagoya or Aichi, Yokohama, Shibuya, Sapporo, and I might be forgetting one, but yes, we've interviewed those cities. And sorry if I did leave someone out. And Kobe, yes.
It's nice to see that those cities care. This is very, very important, and it wouldn't happen years ago. Currently, those cities actually care a lot about, they get it. They understand that the future of the economy is basically the startups. So, in a way, it's really nice to see more and more cities that are extremely active on developing their startup ecosystem. And I have to also give a good word to Jetro, which has been doing a lot of work also on the startup element. So I do have to say that on the level of ecosystem development from the public sector, Japan is actually doing very, very well. The government is putting a lot of its weight there, and it's encouraging and it's doing a lot of things. As I mentioned before, there is always the risk of doing too many things and basically create a situation where you change the business model of your own entrepreneurs and you create a class of grantpreneurs, basically people that are entrepreneurs just for the grants and the incentive. That would result in no success whatsoever. So we always have to play a very delicate game in terms of how do we support, but at the same time not corrupt or change the incentives. And hopefully this is happening in Japan.
Yeah, so you mentioned that the Japanese government is pretty supportive. Do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that generally there are two types of support that you can think about. One is the macro level, and the other is the micro level. I am a big fan of support on the macro level, which basically means let's analyze the problems and let's attack the root causes of the problems instead of doing the micro level, which is basically let us now start choosing favorites between the startups and start giving them grants and so on. So I'm a very big proponent of the macro level, which basically includes an analysis, strategy, and massive, massive, massive promotion, building a brand of Japan as a startup nation, of Tokyo as a startup nation, of Fukuoka as a startup city, and so on and so on. So I think that this interesting dance and the challenge over here is going to be how do you actually put more on the macro and try to not to do too much on the micro, because one of the locations that comes to mind is Europe. Europe is very interesting. As far as I'm concerned, the support of the public sector has created a very problematic ecosystem because there is so much support that the incentives of the entrepreneurs have changed. Basically, now everyone is applying to European funding and so on and so on. And it creates a situation that we have a problem. Like the entrepreneurs are not thinking, like entrepreneurs in the USA or Israel would not even think about government. They're like, how do I sell? How do I get market share and sell?
It's
So,
because
so yeah, that's sort of like it.
it's rubbed people the wrong way when I said it, but when I say like, I guess my proud stamp is it wasn't my choice, but I've never accepted government money. And like my thought was like, why would you guys accept government money? Like, are you guys losers? It's
No,
like,
I'll tell you, there is a reason
but
to
I
accept
didn't,
government fund.
but I mean, I would now, my mind has changed. I'm more open to it. But before, like, my thought was
That's
like,
that's a pity because I think you had the right mindset for being global successfully. Like the ones that are
gotcha.
thinking about becoming global successfully should not accept government money unless there is one caveat: if they are building a deep tech startup. Deep
Yes,
tech startup, the
yes.
problem is that yeah, the deep
I've
tech is basically something that you won't find investors for because it's basically you're telling someone, look, I'm building a quantum computer, and if it
that's
works
never
you're going
existed
to see your
yet.
money in 20 years. So yeah, so for deep tech, I think that if a government is
I
identifying something on defense tech, it makes a lot of sense. Other than that, I'm really with you with not accepting government.
I do agree with your caveat. Through the 500 Global program, there are several deep tech, and I've been with them through the journey. And it's like the things they're doing is just so cool. It's like, oh my God, yes. I hope what you're building, this material you're building, is just going to revolutionize a transport. But yeah, on the other hand, it's like when you explain to the companies, like, who have you sold to? It's like, no, we're still
Mhm.
develop. Like, what's it? We need to sell this version right now. Like, we don't have like $10 million to like develop this for 5 years. It's
Yeah, no,
so
deep tech startups
uh
have, they need the support of the government, especially
I
in something that
agree.
is strategic, for example, defense tech or chips and so on and so on. Over here, investors are not supposed to invest because even if in the case of success, you're telling them you're going to see your money in 30 years. And investors don't want to wait 30 years. They also have a limited lifespan and they know that they might not be here in 30 years. So that's where a government has to be involved. The problem is that the government is sometimes involved in, hey, I'm building a cool application for finding bees in the street. And that doesn't make a lot of sense. And if you take the money, it also distracts you actually a little bit from actually focusing on your product. And instead, you're just bureaucratically joining programs or filling in forms in a way. So that's a little bit of an issue. And Asia generally has an addiction to those programs in a way. It has an addiction to them when the low-hanging fruit is actually in even in promotion, in marketing, and basically telling people, look, we're a cool destination for startups. So if you have an American or an Israeli or someone from, I don't know, from Thailand, they're not going to go to Singapore. They would go to Japan. And over here, I'll tell you also why governments are very much focused on the startups themselves, because it's easier. Because what is the alternative? The alternative is basically to do deep reforms and basically say, oh, we now have to change the tax rate because Singapore has a much lower tax rates and no capital gains. And we have to change totally to cut through bureaucracy and fire 50% of our workforce that are only making life harder for business people and not. So the idea is that governments avoid those deep, painful reforms and they want to feel good by choosing favorites from the startup. Singapore took the hard path. They basically said, let's become the best in the world to do business in. But this is painful, and I'm not sure it's happening in Japan. Again, I haven't been there, so I'm just talking to you from general things. I have no idea whatsoever.
It's no, just listening to the macro versus the micro. For me, it wasn't a homo. Like in hindsight, or I agree, or that's what it seems to be. Let's say rather than making immigration much easier or starting a company much easier, like. So you're gonna find this funny, but the one of the biggest complaint from startup founders is one, getting an office and creating a bank account.
Wow, that's not good. So yeah, that's a little bit of a problem, you understand? Because if there are massive budgets that are there to work with a startup, but you're like, hey, there is a big elephant in the room, you know?
Exactly,
Let's deal with the
exactly.
elephant instead of giving candies to children in the room. That would make a lot of sense. One more thing with Japan, but this one again, because I haven't been there, it's very problematic to say it, but I've been traveling a lot, and I was also a backpacker. And one of the elements or the impressions that I found, and again, I really want to be careful here because I have no idea, is that generally the level of English of Japanese people that I've met is lower than average than other locations. And again, this connects again to, do you become a champion of the global startup ecosystem? You can only become a champion if, one, you have a population of well above 1 billion people, let's say China, India, and so on, they can focus on themselves and they don't need English. Great, although the Indians are speaking English. That's great. Or two, you focus on the global market. But if you have about 120 million people and you do not communicate in very high proficiency, because what is fake it until you make it? It's all about persuasion. It's communication. It's basically me telling you, look, I've got nothing, but I'm going to be the best in the world. This is my vision. If you cannot have this conversation in a very compelling way, then by definition, you're not necessarily going to be successful. And once again, going to those reforms, there might be a situation based on only my travel buddies from backpacking travel buddies that I would just take all the money that is invested in a startup ecosystem in Japan and push it into learning English and push it into making registration of bank accounts more easier and so on and so on. But then again, those pennies that are under the lamps, people usually avoid them, but not because they don't see them, but because they're scared of them. The risk saying, oh, now I'm going to create a lot of commotion. This is the beauty of Singapore. They said, we have to win. And if this means to be constantly changing as a government with reforms as well, we will do it. And this might be lacking. Again, I'm just giving you my impressions from other countries. I do not really know. But just from knowing what I know from other countries and from what you tell me, Tyson, might be some elements that can be relevant for your specific ecosystem.
Yeah, no, just hearing about Singapore is a very interesting comparison point. What are some other facts about Singapore that make it much easier for startups?
So yeah, Singapore basically acknowledged that the local talent is not there, and they basically created a situation that the tax is probably one of the lowest in Asia. There is no capital gains. There is no exit tax. So in a way that you want to move away from Singapore, not going to tell you, yeah, but Tyson, we think your company is worth 20 million, give us 5 million now. So in a way, they just said, look, let me think about how do I make your life easier. There is an entrepreneur visa, there is an entrepreneur visa. They're easy. There is no bureaucracy. Everything is in English. In a way, they've created a winning ecosystem, not by having winning entrepreneurs necessarily, but just by creating an environment that everyone is just flocking to them and basically saying, look, I want a Singaporean company. Until you have this in Japan, you're going to have to do what the Israelis have done, which is basically rely only on your own entrepreneurs. But maybe from the stories that you were telling me, the level of entrepreneur is still not there. So it makes a lot of sense to attract. But then again, but to the benefit of Japan, I also want to say that it's much harder to do this the bigger the country is. The bigger the country is, the slower it is. It's like an elephant, not a cockroach. Who would survive in nature? Someone that can run very, very fast and adjust and so on and so on. So the bigger the country is, the more difficult it becomes. That's why the small countries like Estonia, like Israel, like Singapore, like Finland, like Sweden, they run very fast because they can. For a country that has a bigger size of population and is bigger and also has maybe social norms that are more, let's say, glued together and are hard to change, it's not as easy. But at least I do think that the government is going in the right direction. I see them there. They care, they push. So, yeah.
So I'll give one positive for the government, also one criticism. The one positive would be they have this loan called the JFC loan, which it's a loan, but if the entrepreneur can get it, they're not personally liable.
That's good.
And so and you can get some pretty good amounts, like 100,000, maybe in sometimes some cases like $200,000. And it is hard to get, but it's through a bank, which is, let's say, guaranteed by the government. And if you're a business, an entrepreneur that maybe doesn't want to get venture capital, but you do want to raise funds, but you don't want to also have personal liability. If you do have a track record, like meaning your company is actually profitable, that is one route for entrepreneurs. And I think that was a good program that the government created. The one horror story is it kind of went a little bit viral on LinkedIn Japan. So not super viral, but LinkedIn Japan viral is one of my friends. He's someone I really want to see succeed because he's invested a lot of his own personal money. He's invested his own money, family money, even taken a loan. And what happened, I think he took a loan, but what happened was he was applying for a renewal for the entrepreneurship visa. Immigration delayed on it and his bank account got frozen. And this was after 2 or 3, maybe 3 years in his business and still start up. For me, that's tragic. This one person who's betting on your country is all in. This is the type of people you don't want, these flaky foreigners. You're tired of flaky foreigners, but you get this person who finally is serious about Japan, and you treat him this way.
And the problem is that it went viral. Now it goes viral. This is a red flag for anyone who is serious and might have considered Japan compared to Singapore. Once you see a post like that, it's over. It's game over. There is no reason for anyone. Look, startups are so difficult and the risk is so big on building your startup. Why would you take other risks? And that's basically the beauty of Singapore. They tell you, look, I don't know if you're going to fail, you're going to succeed. You have 90% chance of failure. But if you're going to fail, it's not going to be because of me. I'm going to give you all the support and make sure that it's a very, very smooth ride. And by the way, not even the support. I'm just not going to be in your way. And I think that the Americans, the Israelis, the Singaporeans, that's what they do. They don't necessarily support too much, but they just make sure that they're not in your way. And in Hebrew, we have a saying about the P, not your honey and not your stink, which basically means, look, don't give me honey. In this case, it would be those JFC loans and programs and grants and so on, but don't sting me as well, because the sting hurts a lot more than the honey in a way. And if you have an element of sting in the ecosystem, it's not going to work.
Yeah, it is embarrassing. Like Jetro is working very hard, and to work this hard and see it's kind of stressful at times. But yeah, I am a fan of Jetro as well. One of the common challenges I see with my consulting clients is not having any staff internally who can drive marketing strategy and execution to the next level. This really limits the growth trajectory of a company, especially for a leader like you that wants to go from 30 million to 500 million yen a year and does not have the time to spend years learning through trial and error. To solve this problem, I'm launching a marketing agency that can help companies like yours to increase leads and closing rates through SEO, Google Maps, content marketing, and websites that convert. Head over to scalingyourcompany.com and book a free consultation. Let's talk about what your business needs are, where your current strategy is letting you down, and how we can help you see real results with the methods I've successfully implemented at multiple companies myself.
Now, back to the episode.
Do you have more on maybe business environment versus overall rank?
Yeah, so basically, the Japanese business environment is not bad at all. It's actually relatively good. Not in the level of Singapore, that would be, let's say, the third in the world. And that's where I think you should aspire to. But business environment is relatively good. It's not that you're like, I don't want to give people the impression after this discussion that, oh my God, like we're doing really bad on business environment. That you're ranked, let me have a quick look, 19 on business environment. So you're doing even better on business environment than you are on 21 on the global level, on the general element. So that means that if we're trying to find, Tyson, who is to blame, that we're not San Francisco yet, it would be a combination. And we would probably, and that's the good news, would not necessarily blame the government. We would put the blame a little bit more on the entrepreneurs. Because the government is creating those business conditions that are relatively okay. They're not brilliant, but they're good and they continue to improve. So that's something beautiful that is happening in Japan. The problem is that there are some countries, one that pops to mind is also Australia, extremely high on business environment, if I'm not mistaken, one number 4 in the world. And on the actual success, the ranking itself is number 11. So you have a few examples of governments that get it right. But then again, there is nothing you can do. You are still relying on the quality of your entrepreneurs and the mindset of the entrepreneur. So generally, if we have to kind of figure out if the entrepreneurs and the government are on the same level, we would say, yes, the government might even do it might advance even better than the entrepreneurs, and we're going to need it the other way. And a counter example to that would be France and Israel. Both of those countries have worse business environment than Japan by far. Doing business in Israel is difficult. It really is. But the quality of entrepreneurs is so good that it's ranked number 3 in the world. Just because they create the Wiz, the Waze, then the Waze just raised $1 billion. The Wiz just raised 1 million billion. Waze, we're using it on our Google Monday that we use it for project management. Mobileye, they just sold to Intel a few years ago for $15 billion. So the idea is that even though the business environment is not there, the mindset is there. Then the mindset is, I'm going to win globally. I'm not interested in anything else than winning globally. And I think this is still, in the end of the day, if we're looking at what is missing in Japan, it's that. It's this thing from our entrepreneurs. It's the mindset that the minute we get it right and have more SoftBank and more masses in the world, we're going to be very much better off. I just, once again, encourage people to follow this example. You know, many of the entrepreneurs that I really admire, I wouldn't go to lunch with them. They won't be my friends because they're a little bit arrogant and they're fake it until you make it. And sometimes they even flirt with lying and so on and so on. That's what we need in the startup game. It's not about playing safe. It's about going full speed. It's about having conviction. It's about dreaming about something much bigger than what you have now. And I just encourage people to give more. If you have a relative or someone that is building something and whatever, avoid this thing about yes, but if it doesn't work and you're gonna owe money and whatever, and give a little bit of yeah, it's gonna be okay. Like do your thing in a way. And there are more people in Japan that have to do their thing. So I guess again, without being there never. So everything I say is based on other countries, but that would be a good place to start.
Excellent. And next, I wanted to move on to industry-specific focus because Japan, based on our preparation, Japan actually ranks very high in some industries. So I'd like you to tell us more about that.
Yeah, I think your industries, unsurprisingly, there are a few that are ranked very high. The industries have to do a lot with your past, probably. So you're doing relatively well on hardware and IoT, which is not surprising considering how many hardware and IoT companies you have. By the way, it does come to mind, if I would have criticism, in terms of something that doesn't work, it would 100% not be on the government and also not on the entrepreneurs. Intuitively, it would be on your big companies. I would actually ask, what is Sony doing for our entrepreneurs or for our ecosystem? What is Toshiba doing for them? And so on and so on. But it seems like there is a push on hardware and IoT because of the success of this older generation of those companies. So that's definitely one thing that you do well. Another thing that comes to mind is marketing and sales. All those companies like Rakuten and so on, you're doing well, and you're doing also well on energy and environment and food tech as well, and health tech as well. So there are a few, although everything that I mentioned here, you're in the top 20, hardware and IoT are number 13. Remember, Japan is ranked number 21, but all those industries that I mentioned, you're definitely in the top 20, and those are interesting industries that you're relatively strong with. Hardware and IoT is the one that really jumps to mind in terms of the industries, and that's absolutely great. It means that you have to play on your strength and keep on developing that, hopefully creating the next generation of the Sonys and the Toshibas at some point. So yeah.
I know you have to look at many different countries, so maybe it might not be on the radar, but have you noticed any trends in terms of industries? Maybe some industries that have, let's say Japan has risen in the ranks and maybe decreased.
That's a good one. We have not done momentum yet for the industries because it's relatively new for us. So I can't really tell you about the momentum yet. But I would once again say that even in terms of Tokyo, when I'm looking at Tokyo, that is ranked number 14, we have three industries that you're actually advancing in or doing really well. Marketing and sales, you're number 5 in the world, hardware and IoT number 8, and energy and environment number 9. So we have a few very, very clear winners in a way, and we have a few industries that we're not necessarily doing well, like fintech, for example, on a global level. But that's not a problem at all. Like I'm always telling to cities, choose your winners. There is no reason for you to be San Francisco that you're competing on absolutely every sport in the world and every industry and winning it. It's enough to find 2 or 3, in some cases even 1, and just go full speed. Singapore, for example, took a very big bet on fintech. And that's that bet it's really working out. So in a way, London did the same, New York did the same in a way. Shenzhen in China took a very big bet that is successful on hardware and IoT as well. So Tel Aviv or Israel is taking a big bet on cybersecurity. So France is now focusing, and in the United Arab Emirates, they're focused on AI. So the idea is to find a few things that work and just go full speed.
And I thought there's I think you suggested this topic, which I really like, is if whether Tokyo should focus on specific industries or aim to become a generalist ecosystem.
I think that you have to focus on few specific industries. Like honestly, currently the only city in the world that should focus on all the industries is San Francisco, because they just have such a big, like the Bay Area is so dominant on so many things. But definitely it makes sense to focus on a few, and that means that also when the government is doing its strategy and its programs and its incentives and so on, it makes sense to push most of those incentives on those strategic industries that are important to the government, plus we're already successful in, instead of trying to revive industries where we're not doing that.
Interesting, because I know you just answered about it, but when you're giving the previous answer, I was thinking less of Tokyo. I was thinking more like, yeah, like Fukuoka or Sapporo, Nagoya with a 2 million population. Focus on 2 things makes sense, but not
even
for Tokyo.
For Tokyo, but definitely for cities like Fukuoka as well, it makes a lot of sense to focus on the industries as well. Fukuoka currently in the world is ranked 242, but in terms of the industries, they have energy and environment 150, hardware and IoT 160. Fintech is actually better in Fukuoka than the ranking at 200. So Fukuoka does have a few industries where they're doing very well. The smaller the city is, the more it should focus on less industries.
Yeah, that is interesting. And I mean, what industries Tokyo should focus on would probably be a different discussion, but yeah, that's interesting.
I would focus on what they're doing well in marketing and social and hardware and IoT, and so that's kind of like the idea, but yeah.
You did talk a little bit earlier about some policies with like using the Singapore case as in reducing as much friction as possible, making it easy as possible for people to start. But did you have any maybe final thoughts on some advice for policymakers?
No, exactly that. I would speak with as many people as possible, including your friend, and try to understand where does the friction happen, and just attack the friction. Like say, oh, okay, we have a problem with bank accounts. Let's make it easier. Oh, okay, we have a problem with visas. Let's make it easier. So the idea is to make it as easier as possible for the segment of the population that you're trying to attract into your ecosystem. And that usually happens by looking on LinkedIn, seeing who is complaining about what, and speaking with people. And then you're going to be just great.
Yeah, or I would say, I don't think I've had anyone from any city come and ask me my opinion. So,
and that's a problem because that's a problem also of startup founders, by the way. They don't ask enough opinion. All of us, we're so in love with our own solutions that we're like, I don't care about the users, but at the end of the day, the real successful ones, cities and startups, are the ones that are going out there and saying, look, what isn't working? What is the pain? Let me focus on the pain and not on the solution. So that's also correct for the cities and also for most startup founders. Yeah.
I'll make that public as well. Like no cities have come and asked for, of course, let's say I can only know what's on the ground level in Japan. I don't have San Francisco as reference, but yeah, or you'd figure there'd be at least a little bit more.
Yeah.
But cool. And I think, yes, I think we covered all of our topics that we planned to talk about. Anything else that has come up on your mind that you'd like to share before we
No,
wrap things up?
I think we covered everything, and thanks for doing that for your own ecosystem. That's really great, and that's the beauty of private sector ecosystem developers that are pushing towards the success of their ecosystem. So yeah, well, like great work, and thank you so much for inviting me. Really appreciate it.
It was great to have you, Eli, and learn some new things myself.
Excellent.